So thank you to everyone who's joining us today for our special webinar on suffering in silence, suicidality, and neurodiverse communities of color. And my screen's not advancing. Okay, so here are some of the logistics that I think already started coming up. I'm actually apparently unable to see the chat, so my apologies for that, but because this is a webinar, unmuting and normal chat functions are disabled, but there is a Q&A function. So if you have questions or comments, you can put them in there and they will be visible to the presenters. We will be unlikely to have time to cover live questions and answers today, but are planning to put together answers that we'll post on our website at a later date. And we'll email you to let you know that those are ready. We are recording this webinar and we'll make it available. And then at the end, I'll share continuing education information and we'll also send that by email. So just to review, our learning objectives for today are to appreciate the state of the science and especially the lived experiences of suicidality in autistic people of color, thinking about how being twice marginalized might impact suicidality, and then hopefully ending with some positive hope for the future, ideas of support and resources. So in terms of our agenda, it's going to begin with me, just a basic background on suicide in autism, followed by Lisa Morgan, and then our roundtable of individuals providing different perspectives on suicide in neurodiverse communities of color in particular. And then shifting to our topic of supporting positive change, and then hopefully time for everyone to give some final comments and a wrap up. So I'm just going to jump in with a very brief overview to get us on the same page about why we're here today. And I think what the take home point is, it's a little bit about what we know, but emphasizing that there's quite a lot that we don't know about autism and suicide. And I really want to start with this quote that's from one of our collaborators, Ann Kirby's K23 Aspire study that really captures kind of the point of this webinar today. And this is from an autistic adult. I'd say probably the number one thing that researchers should know about autism and suicide is that it's the rule rather than the exception. If an autistic adult isn't suicidal, then they probably are doing things to push it out of their mind because it's pretty much always there because we're constantly rejected. And I'd say that's true, especially of queer and trans autistic folks and folks of color. And that's no exception for me. So the research that we have to date really does support what's in that quote. So far, it suggests very high rates of suicide in autism, some even suggesting it's the leading cause of premature death in those without intellectual disability. There are statistics showing that up to half of autistic people may attempt suicide during their lifetime, and nearly 3/4 may experience suicidal ideation. These rates are significantly higher than the non-autistic population. But the one thing I really want to emphasize is you see variable rates in the literature, and this is area of research is really in its infancy. Most of the studies have been samples of convenience, a lot of studies of white women, and much more research is needed to really fully understand suicide in autism. To date, it looks like, as you might expect, there are some factors that are unique to suicide in autism related to masking of autism symptoms or the exhaustion from being autistic in a neurotypical world, difficulty with transitions, difficulty with employment and housing, and isolation. Interestingly and importantly, there's also some research that suggests that factors that are protective in the non-autistic population are not as protective in autism. Again, we're still learning, and this is preliminary. Most of that's just a brief summary from this policy brief and some recent research. The one thing that is really important to emphasize related to why we're here today is that autism also doesn't occur in a vacuum, and there's intersectionality with many other aspects of identity that are known to impact suicide risk. So these multiple factors can affect presentation and needs, and we're going to hear more about that today. Okay, so with that, I am going to stop sharing and turn it over to Lisa Morgan to share her experience.
Thank you, Carla. Hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Morgan. I'm an autistic adult, and I advocate for crisis supports and suicide prevention. And I started doing that because my husband died by suicide, and what I experienced from the people who were supporting me that night was not supportive to me, and I'm going to share my story about that. So 7 years ago this year, my family almost lost 3 people to suicide within a 6-month period. My husband of 29.8 years was found dead by suicide on June 24th, 2015. And 3 months before that, my nephew died by suicide. And 3 months before that, I made a suicide attempt. All of us were either suspected, self-diagnosed, or formally diagnosed on the autism spectrum. Autistic people need support that aligns with their neurology and their sensory sensitivities, so it's not recognized as support. It becomes unintentional harm. It was during the night I found my husband's body that I understood unintentional harm by well-meaning people for the first time. The police showed me exactly where to stand outside the garage doors at my house so I'd be safe while they went inside the house to do a wellness check on my husband. What they didn't know is they put me directly in harm's way due to my acute sense of smell. I realized standing there alone that my husband was dead just a few feet away from me on the other side of the garage doors and had been for a while. As I was trying to fathom what my senses were telling me, the policemen suddenly rushed back outside of the house and quickly surrounded me, again to keep me safe. But again, they didn't understand they moved too fast and surrounded me too quickly. And I collapsed to the ground, not because of the news of my husband's death, which I had found out myself, but because I was overwhelmed by them surrounding me. And then there was a heavy hand on my shoulder, which I could feel for months afterwards when I thought about that night, as a police officer used his hand on my shoulder to guide me across the street. So besides the flashing lights from the police cars, the humidity of a June evening in Florida, mosquitoes, and the devastating news that my husband was dead, I had extremely high anxiety, causing a slow processing speed. And I was required to answer questions from the police sergeant and felt like I needed to make eye contact, but I just couldn't. I had to make small talk with the victim's advocate, who insisted I interact with her therapy dog, although I'm very much a cat person. I declined offers to sit down to a normal dinner with my neighbors and felt really bad about that. I only asked for one thing, and that was to see my husband's body come out of the house, but still they insisted I cross the street, and then they positioned the coroner's van and a police car so I could not see. My memory needed a visual picture of my husband's death. These were all kind, supportive first responders, victims advocate, and neighbors who were showing care and support, yet I felt completely alone on one of the worst nights of my life because I didn't understand the support they were giving me as supportive. What I needed was time to regulate. Offers from the neighbors of space and for them to support me with silence. Understanding that making small talk would have been excruciating for me. I needed to be able to not make eye contact, to pace, to see my husband's body removed from the garage, and I needed the police to turn their flashing lights off. These were not preferences, not something I simply wanted. They were needs. They were necessary for me to be okay. They would have been support, and they would have caused me to feel connected, understood, and supported, and importantly, not alone. Even as I had reached out to professionals for help during my own suicide attempt, the support I received was judgment, shame, and powerlessness. I felt unsafe, scared, and profoundly alone. Imagine being in so much emotional pain that you come to believe the only way to stop it is to kill yourself. But instead of doing that, you make the decision to reach out for help. And what you experience is invalidation, misunderstandings, your inner experience not being believed, sensory onslaught, and just more of the same kind of alienating social interactions that have been your experience since you can remember. Imagine being surrounded by people you know are there to help, but feeling harmed instead because you simply do not recognize their support as being supportive. To me, it felt much more like those decades-old feelings of thwarted belonging, alienation, and not being completely understood. Autistic people think, communicate, and experience the world differently than non-autistic people, and we need support we can recognize as support. And now we are going to shift to the roundtable to hear more about suicide in neurodiverse communities of color specifically, starting with Tenisha Jones.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tenisha Jones, and I'm a third-year doctoral student at Howard University in School of Psychology. So my primary research interests include the mental health, the well-being, and education of Black girls. More specifically, most of my research is focused on investigating the mental health and adultification of Black girls. So imagine being just 6 years old and feeling like your life isn't worth living. Unfortunately, this is a very real and heartbreaking lived experience for youth with autism. Studies have shown that youth with autism undergo a significantly greater risk of suicide compared to their neurotypical peers. In fact, research has also revealed that as early as 6 years old, youth with autism face a 1 in 4 chance of experiencing suicide ideation. Additionally, autistic youth are sometimes 6 times more likely to attempt suicide and twice as likely to die by suicide. While the specific reasons for this increased risk requires further research, it is clear that adverse childhood experiences, including bullying, gender identity, abuse, socioeconomic status, and ethnic minority status, may all contribute. But Black youth in particular confront a unique set of stress-inducing life circumstances, such as racism, police brutality, community violence, isolation, historical trauma, inadequate access to mental health services, and adultification, just to name a few. These stressors can further worsen their already existing conditions to their intersectionality of being autistic and racial identities, leading to conditions such as depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. Of particular concern is the lack of research focused on the intersectional experiences of Black girls with autism who face triple marginalization due to their Black, female, and neurodiverse identities. Research has shown that Black girls with autism may face unique stressors due to their intersecting identities, which can exacerbate mental health challenges and increase suicide risk. And so when we think more about adultification, adultification is a gendered racial bias where Black girls are perceived as more adult-like than their non-Black peers, which leads to unfair treatment that deprives them of a carefree childhood. And so when we think of the history of adultification, adultification has a long history dating back to the enslavement of Black girls who were stripped of their childhood protections and subject to physical and sexual abuse. And so when we think more so, when we go throughout the 20th century, Black girls continue to face threats to the typical protections of childhood. The threat of the loss of Black girls' life and innocence played a crucial role even in the civil rights movement, whether we think about the Birmingham 7, the murder of the 4 innocent Black girls, Audie, Cynthia, Carol, and Caroline, or even the courage of 6-year-old Ruby Bridges. Today, Black girls still face this marginalization resulting from adultification with disproportionate rates of classroom discipline, school suspensions, and referrals to the juvenile justice system, which contributes to the school to prison pipeline. And so when we think more specifically about adultification in schools, we think about the disciplinary practices where Black girls are often singled out and criticized for their clothing choice with their body makeup and not the actual outfit being the focus of attention. They may be labeled as hypersexualized or are as Jezebels, and they fall victim to these negative stereotypes that invalidate their innocence and reinforce all of these harmful stereotypes. And they may even be stereotyped as the angry Black woman when they are indeed young girls. And so even when they think about asking different questions, it's perceived as challenge and authority rather than innocent and inquisitive children asking questions. So when we think about adultification and how it continues these negative stereotypes of Black girls, undermining their self-esteem and subjecting them to fair treatment in schools, Black girls with autism, they are even more at risk of this adultification. And so when Black girls with autism are no longer viewed as children and instead as many adults, they are punished more harshly for simple mistakes, and they're given less support with their schoolwork, and even subjected to coded language such as "you know better," when indeed they don't know better. What is it that they know better of? This only undermines their confidence and their self-esteem. This differential treatment due to adultification could contribute to feelings of disconnection from schools, especially when additional support and accommodations are needed for academic success. So to avoid future alienation and marginalization in schools, I want to research school connectedness as a variable to help Black girls feel valued and seen in schools. School connectedness is essential for all students, as described by the feelings of acceptance, support, and value within the school environment. According to the Centers for Disease Control, school connectedness is defined as feeling close to people at school, which has lasting protective impacts well into adulthood. Research shows that students who feel safe at school are 3.2 times less likely to attempt suicide. And so furthermore, if we can get our Black girls with adultification to feel connected at school, it may be possible that they will be less likely to attempt suicide. Although we don't have the research to show this, it's some things in the research that's showing that it may be a protective factor. So I want to explore whether that connectedness at school, having positive relationships with teachers and peers, receiving the appropriate resources and support will help Black girls with autism feel like they belong in their school communities. And so through targeted research and a deeper understanding on the impacts of adultification and school connectedness on Black girls with autism, I hope that school psychologists can develop effective strategies that promote supportive, inclusive school environments and prevent poor mental health outcomes. School connectedness should really be a reality for all, especially Black girls with autism, to help lessen the risk of suicidal ideation and further protect their mental health. And so next, we will have Morénike of Advocacy Without Borders.
Thank you so much, Tenisha, and hello, everyone. I really appreciate you being here. My name is Morénike Giwa Onaiwu, and I wear a number of hats. I am a consultant, a writer, an advocate. I'm a parent of autistic and non-autistic children. I'm a person who's multiply neurodivergent. I am autistic myself, in addition to some other diagnoses. I use identity first language to identify myself as autistic, but person with autism, which is person first language, or neutral language on the spectrum is acceptable as well. Of all of the different roles that I have and all of the different, angles that I can come from, today I feel really compelled to come to you all as little me. And I'm thinking about the research that Tenisha shared earlier, and I think about how relevant that is to my life. I remember being 6 years old, and my older brother and I got in a little squabble, and I remember him saying, "Oh, you can be so annoying sometimes. I wish I'd never asked mom for a baby sister." And he was just being an annoying kid. That's the stuff kids say. But I remember taking that, sitting with that for hours and thinking, wow, he's right. I really wish I wasn't here. I am in a lot of trouble. And it wasn't just about what he said. It was not a message that I had gotten from life about the way things were challenging or how I didn't say things right or do things right or move things right. And I was in a loving environment, a supportive environment, but I had already gotten the messages from society that something was wrong with me. And so I can move ahead to age 11 or 12. I had a journal. I named the journal Celie after the long-suffering character in The Color Purple, because I identified a lot with her. She was unliked, she was ugly, she was unseen. She, was kind of like the mule of the family, of the community. She had to do so much and was unappreciated. And that wasn't me. I was the person who had learned how to camouflage and mask, because I had spent hours in the mirror practicing how to move, how not to move, how to speak, what to do. I had all A's in my classes. My older brother had shown me how to dress because I had no fashion sense whatsoever, but he did. And so that helped. I was the epitome of the perfect child, well-behaved, athletic, et cetera, and I was dying inside. I hated everything about myself and my life. I hated how everything was so hard for me that was easy for everyone else, and that the things that were easy for me were not valued. And I was miserable, and I no longer wanted to be on this earth. And it wasn't because I was angry at anyone or anyone had harmed me, although like a lot of Black and brown and also white autistic children, I had experienced sexual abuse already, because unfortunately the adultification is very real. But at this time in my life, having friends, having a supportive family, the world was still so horrible for me that I didn't want to live. And so in that journal, I wrote out the pros and cons of different methods of suicide. And the only reason that I am sitting here with you all today is because I'm autistic and I couldn't go through with a method that I wanted. So I thought about drowning myself. And I thought, that's very painful. And then also when my family finds my body, it's going to be bloated and really disgusting. And I don't want to traumatize my parents like that. That's the same reason why I ruled out hanging myself or slicing my wrists. So then I thought about, trying to get a gun, which would have been hard to do, but I thought about maybe, there was a crack house about 6 floors down, getting one from there. Like maybe there's some kind of way I could borrow it, but then I thought about the fact that I could miss and injure myself or hurt someone else, or it would also create a very disfigured body. So finally I decided that the best thing to do, we live near railroad tracks, I thought about that, but again, the body would be destroyed. So I finally figured out sleeping pills. I'll take sleeping pills. That way I'll just look like I'm asleep. Boom, that won't hurt anybody's feelings. I'll look the same. But I lived in a neighborhood where the only place you could get, if you didn't have to drive, which I didn't as a small child, the only place you could get sleeping pills would be from the corner store, and the corner store kept those things behind the counter. They didn't keep those things on the shelves. And so as a young girl, what business did I have asking for the allergy medicine or the sleeping things? If you wanted those things, you had to show ID or explain. And then I also realized that even if I was fast enough to steal it and run away and not get caught, how was I going to be able to keep myself alone long enough before someone realized what was happening? So I begrudgingly stayed alive because I couldn't find a way. But that wasn't the first time I've had suicidal ideation. It continued through high school. It continued through college until I had my very first attempt and was hospitalized when it was incorrect. And I remember the way that the very callous way that the professionals treated me in that inpatient place, because as far as they were concerned, what reason did I have? I said, this is stupid. I didn't have any reason to do this. And they didn't understand it. And the people around me also didn't understand, because I was sure not to give signs. Why would I start giving my things away? Because then people would be suspicious. Why am I going to do that? If I want to kill myself, I'm not trying to tip people off. So why am I going to skip class or not go to work? I'm going to go. I'm going to go through the motions because I just want to remove myself from the circumstances and remove myself from, being this drain on the world. And so this has been something that's been recurring so many periods of my life. It has been such an active struggle to stay alive. It has been such an active struggle to have to try to look up figures. Okay, let me find statistics. What happens to children whose parents commit suicide, to try to trick myself into saying, see, you're going to be causing these problems to your children, so don't do it. And it's still something that I struggle with all of the accomplishments that I have, as you know, and all the things that I've dealt with, that you know, this is something that's still very, very real. And so I want to share with you that we don't always look like everybody else who is suicidal. We might not be crying and weepy and sad and dragging around and not bathing, because it might be more work to do all that. It might be easier to just go through emotions, go through your routine and live your life. But I'm telling you that when you're an autistic person, and particularly Black and Brown, and not just autistic, but neurodivergent, because that tends to be quite common, these are very, very real and very common struggles. There are a few people that I know who have not had these types of suicidal ideations or even attempts in their lives. And it's just something that's a major issue. And so I want to now segue to Dr. Shanter, who is going to talk about stigma and discrimination and how all of this is, you know, plays into this topic. Thank you for your patience, everyone.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing with us, Morénike, and just being so very transparent. I'm Shanter Alexander. I'm assistant professor of school psychology at Howard University. And at the core of everything that I do, I am really passionate about reverencing every opportunity that I have to learn from our autistic community. It is not easy to expose your story. And I want to thank Morénike so much for sharing with us just now. So I identify as Black, Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean descent woman from a family where there was my cousin was born deaf, and eventually on our 238 square mile island, we realized that he was also autistic on the spectrum. Limited resources, and the impact of his experience on our family, the guilt, the struggle to understand why. But most of all, the stigma and discrimination that comes with having a family with a child with a disability, and the desire to hide that. It's definitely a challenge. So I want to share with you some of the work that we have been doing with regard to understanding suicidality and the lived experiences of Black autistic females. The research is exceedingly limited as it relates to this particular topic. And just recently, we were able to partner with, I want to give an honorable mention here with Rachel Pretlow, who helped guide us in understanding what is the lived experience of Black autistic women, tying it into the experiences related to suicidality. We discovered four underlying themes, and you heard them emerging in Morénike's story just now, of invisibility, stigmatization, dehumanization, and racial biases. So in the first instance, we looked at what invisibility is, and that relates to how Black autistic women feel neglected and unseen in society, and highlight how often they are overlooked and go unheard. One particular participant in the study expressed that she felt that the worst part was feeling not a part of the community. On our next slide here, it says that another participant suggests that there are very few people who can understand and relate to her experience, and that she's been masking for so long, even if she knew what autism was. When I found out, I realized people would never see me as I want to be seen: Black, autistic, and a woman. And the research, apart from half of all autistic individuals at some point attempting suicide, the rate is even higher for Black autistic females. That invisibility and feeling like, as Morénike said, an individual is dying inside. The next theme that came up is the feeling of stigmatization, which refers to negative stereotypes and biases that are faced every single day. We talk about the angry Black woman and just finding your place in society. And some of the participants shared with us what their experiences were as it relates to that. If they don't know that I'm on the spectrum, they just think that I'm mean, I'm angry, or downright hostile because I don't show a lot of facial expressions and I have a monotone voice. I have to appear non-threatening and talk in a higher or more friendly cadence that is not my natural voice. And so that feeling of stigmatization and the story and the narrative that comes with simply being Black, but on top of that, the intersection of being Black and autistic, and the dehumanization that comes along with that. The dehumanization being a form of oppression that occurs when Black autistic women are denied of their basic human rights. That includes recognition, respect, and agency over their own bodies and their lives. And so some of the participants shares with us that people thought I was just weird, called me all kinds of names. I was bullied a lot, whether in childhood, in elementary school, or even as adults. I feel like an alien in my country and within my own race. I feel like we are like a species of our own. And all of those struggles leading to isolation and depression and anxiety and just a general sense of being overwhelmed and misunderstood by the world. And the final theme that emerged was the racial and gender biases that create a level of bias and prejudice that care providers and educators have towards Black autistic women, Black autistic females. And one particular female participant shared with us that the medical field already has a big issue with listening to Black people, especially women. So there's little wonder why autism in Black women is so misunderstood and how it trickles down into society. So as I close off, I want to talk about what some of the implications are for our communities, our schools, and our medical field as it relates to addressing the needs and the concerns of suicidality amongst communities of color. Our communities need to first understand that it is not an abstract concept, that autism reflects the lived experiences of real people. And we need to provide supports and opportunities for real people to be seen and to cancel the stigma and discrimination that comes with being autistic. In our school systems, we want our educators, our school-based practitioners to begin to recognize the factors that put the future lives of autistic females and males at risk because of a feeling of dehumanization and isolation, and for a sensitivity from the medical field and the intentional listening and creating space for the narratives of our neurodiverse community. We seek to ensure that we are intervening and saving lives, and that no longer will Black autistic people, Black and brown autistic people, as Morénike said, begrudgingly stay alive. We want to support life. And so I pass on to Finn right now so that he can share with us a little bit more.
Okay, thank you so much. Anyway, my name is Finn, and I am the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Autistic People of Color Fund. And so I have previously worked with different disability organizations like the Lurie Institute for Disability Policy and the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. So I've been in the disability advocacy community for a while. And I also speak from a variety of perspectives. I am queer, I'm Black, I'm trans, I'm autistic, I have other mental health, I have other, mental health diagnoses as well. For example, I have bipolar, and part of that includes depression. And I also have PTSD and generalized anxiety, and all these things together have influenced my approach to what it means to feel like you want to die. So for context, I grew up in an environment that was not very affirming of my identities or experiences. My parents were abusive. They were primarily psychologically abusive. One of them was also sexually abusive. And so I grew up in an environment of abuse, on and off, of course, but I grew up in an environment of abuse. I was taught that I was diagnosed as autistic at an early age, but I was taught to mask. I was taught that having reactions to things in an autistic way was not okay. I was taught constantly that I was broken, that there was something wrong with me, that I was a burden, a word that my mother actually used. I was taught that I was my life, the value of my existence. And it is a terrifying thing to be told that your existence is something that you should regret by the people who brought you into the world in the first place. Abusive parents are some of the worst people to walk this planet, to be honest. But anyway, and unfortunately, a lot of autistic people go through abuse, whether it's abuse through certain behavioral educational methods that are used, or or by relatives or by partners. A lot of us face abuse. And when you are abused, every time that happens, your trust is betrayed. And when you are multiply marginalized, if you're trans and your parents refuse to use the right pronouns, refuse to use the right names, my parents did not. They use the wrong pronouns, wrong names. They use a name that I hate, and I stopped speaking to them 16 years ago. I stopped speaking to them 16 years ago because they refused to affirm me. I stopped speaking to them 16 years ago because they refused to acknowledge me as a human being with rights and dignity. And being deprived of your dignity for so long makes a lot of people, including me, feel they want to die. And that was especially potent last year when I had experienced a serious mental health crisis last year. And it was nothing that I had ever experienced before. And I had some people react to it very badly. Some people stopped talking to me. Some people made excuses. Most people were great, but there were some people, and then I was just reminded of what a waste I was, what a burden I was, how I didn't feel that I deserved to exist. And so in December of last year, I attempted suicide. I did not go through with it, obviously, or I wouldn't be here talking. But I got everything for months, I was looking up suicide methods. I was on forums where people talk about these things. No, I will not give out the names, but I was in places where people talk about those things. And I had a method, and I was about to use it. And midway, I backed out. I freaked out because I backed out. I freaked out. I was scared. And I called the crisis hotline. And about 40 minutes later, I was, at the local mental health center talking to their, nighttime triage worker about what was going on. And I was put in the ER for 2 days. I was no longer suicidal when I was in the ER, but they still kept me there anyway, and I was on suicide watch. And it was the first time that I had actually made a serious attempt, and I had a plan for that long. And before it happened, I went through the motions, kind of like what Morénike talked about. I just went through the motions. I was not I still went into work. I still did all the activities I wanted to. I still hung out with my friends. I still did everything that I would normally do, but I was also trying very hard, and I kept thinking, oh, and then I was frantically trying to put my affairs in order, trying to upload stuff that people could see it after I died, writing suicide letters I was going to schedule to have sent out after I was gone. You know, I put enough food in my cat's bowl for her to last a few days, and, you know, hoping that somebody would get my suicide note. Like, so, you know, to go back to what I was saying before, it is incredibly important for people to acknowledge that abuse and neglect and other kinds of mistreatment can contribute to the to autistic people's suicidality. And, you know, as a policy person, I suggest that there should be some ways, some concrete ways to deal with this, with the higher rates of suicidality among autistic people of color. Number one, try to make sure you have interventions in place in the school system to make sure that these kids are not being abused at home, and find ways to support kids who may be abused at home. Do something about bullying. Actually, just because I was bullied pretty badly in elementary school. Do something about the bullies. Do something about disproportionate discipline. Do something about classroom exclusions, where people of color, children of color, especially Black and Latino students, are being excluded from the classroom, being suspended and expelled. You know, I had lots of in-school suspensions when I was in 6th grade because I had meltdowns in class because I was overloaded and being constantly bullied. And yet it was my fault and I had to be excluded from the classroom. So yeah, school to prison pipeline, disproportionate discipline, that needs to end. We need more mental health that is responsive to the needs of people of color. Mental health care that is culturally sensitive. And it doesn't, like, whether the provider is white or Black or Latinx or whatever, these providers need to know how to support people who experience racial marginalization, people who have faced racism in their lives and are trying to dismantle its effects. We need to fight back, because we need to fight back. There are a lot of autistic people, including Black autistic people and other autistic people of color, who are LGBTQ+. And a lot of them grow up in these non-affirming, homophobic, transphobic environments where they don't acknowledge your relationships, they call you the wrong name, they use the wrong pronoun, they don't care about how you feel. And they are unwilling to acknowledge your human dignity. We need to fight back against that. We need to fight back against these bills that are being passed to prevent trans youth from being acknowledged in their schools, even if they have affirming parents. We need to protect trans and non-binary kids. Because guess what? I was one of those kids, but I had to mask it. I did not come out as a trans man until I was 20. I had to mask it. And this was the 90s. Nobody knew about that stuff. It would have been hell for me to grow up. Now that you know, it's all under the microscope now, it would have been hell for me to grow up now. I feel for these kids. And we need to do something about the services we provide. We need to make sure that people have access to services and support that allow them to live in the community, because a lot of people feel like burdens. They feel like they're stressing out their family, stressing out their friends because they don't have services. We need to have comprehensive home and community-based services that are not tied to income. They are not means-based. Because right now, a lot of that stuff, at least in the US, is being done through Medicaid. And in Medicaid, you have income limits. And of course, they're also trying to add Medicaid work requirements, which is another thing we need to stop. So how do you stop people from dying by suicide? How do you stop this from happening? You need to make sure that their lives are worth living. Of course, they are on principle, but you need to make concrete steps to make sure that that we do not have families and friends and community members finding us dead in our beds, in our garages, in rivers, that we are not found dead by suicide because of these gross inequities, because of these gross hostility towards our dignity and our lives. And I would like to transition to Kayla.
Great panel so far. Thank you, everyone. Hello, my name is Kayla Rodriguez. I am the executive advisory co-chair for the executive advisory board co-chair for the Autistic Women Non-Binary Network, along with Morénike, and I work as a social media coordinator for Foundations for Divergent Minds. And visual description of me: I am a light-skinned Puerto Rican woman with Black hair. I'm wearing a blue shirt with flowers on, not because of Light Up Blue, I promise. I just found this shirt and just liked it. So I'm not wearing it because of Light Up Blue, I promise. But and then my background's kind of like, my kitchen background's kind of beige walls and stuff. So with my story, like I mentioned, I'm autistic. I have ADHD. I have, depression, anxiety, OCD, PTSD, binge eating disorder, and type 1 diabetes. And I also feel overwhelmed with all of those identities. I'm also gay, and sometimes it could be a lot. So my status as a Latina or Latina person hasn't affected my suicidality, hasn't been a big factor in my suicidality. I think it's because I probably have some light skin privilege that I've rarely felt like I've experienced direct discrimination or racism like addressed to me. The only time I really felt like I was discriminated against was when Hurricane Maria happened, and then, nobody really cared about it. But that was, and I had family there, and they, that was really hard because, I didn't know how to contact them. But eventually they're okay. I'm just saying it was a hard time because nobody helped the people in my homeland. So my story with suicide is that I was bullied a lot as a kid. I had a very abusive ex-family member, as I will call it. I became suicidal when I was 10 or 11. That's when I remember writing my first suicide note. I struggled with it on and off for about over 10 years. I think maybe around 15, maybe 14, 15 years. And I recently got better last year because I got some medication that helped, but I still really, sometimes I was really depressed lately because of the disability benefits and the income limit, and that really affected me. Then I got depressed again, so I'm going through a hard time right now, but not as bad as it used to be. They thought I had bipolar disorder because I had really my mood was so up and down. But then I realized it's ADHD that caused the mood swings, because ADHD and PTSD can both cause mood swings. So my diagnostic picture was unclear for a while, and now I finally know what I actually have. So that's good. I have self-harm. I've cut 3 times, and I have attempted suicide. I thought, like Morénike said, a lot of what she thought about how to kill herself, I've also thought of how to kill myself. I've thought way more than I've attempted, but I've thought of many things, including calling the police on me and trying to harm the police so they would shoot me dead. And but I never went through with it because either there was something positive going on that was worth living for, and the fact that I don't want my mom to see me dead. So, and then, what I also didn't help with my suicidality was I was sexually assaulted. It'll be 10 years on May the 2nd. So please wish me luck going through that day, by the ex-family member I mentioned. It made my suicidality worse. I also had to deal with psychiatrists and therapists who think they know me, but they don't. And they think that they know what's best for me. And they don't listen. They didn't listen to my concerns, like, oh, this medication's not working, or you're medicating me too much, or it's causing problems. Sorry, hold on. But these psychiatrists really thought they were the experts of me, but I was the expert of me. All of us are the experts of our own lives, and the doctors are supposed to be there to help us, not try to control us, or not thinking they know what's best for us and what to do. Their job is to help us get to what we need to do, because we know what we need to get better. And there was this one lady, the psychiatrist, who said to my mom, I'm not a miracle worker. And then you know, just there was another doctor who was prescribing me stuff that was giving me health issues, and it was just atrocious. And then when I attempted suicide, and I did interact with the police, and then I went to the hospital. I was hospitalized 4 times, and then the last time I was hospitalized, it was the worst place I've ever been to in my life. They were laughing at the patients, and the staff was laughing at the patients, and they gave us a Benadryl shot if we acted out. And the people who acted well got to go to higher levels of care, better levels of care in that facility. And then if they act out, then they get punished with the Benadryl shot. And you know, just be still in that hellhole. But it was a hellhole because it was a very unfriendly sensory experience. People were loud, they were running away, there was like pee on the floor. It was definitely part of the school to prison pipeline. And like, it was definitely, I just hate mental institutions. I really think mental health care should be better in this country, and there should be more funding for it, because people need to take this seriously, because we deserve to be taken seriously. And how I got better, basically, I've been mostly better with my suicidal ideation since last year. I got a good therapist I've had for a few years now, but I finally found like a really good psychiatrist, and he gave me the right medications, and I've been stable mostly ever since. So things can get better. There is hope. It took me a long time. Like, I started psychiatry when I was like, in 2010, I started seeing a psychiatrist, and it took me up until last year, so like 12 years, to find a good psychiatrist. And it's hard to find that. And it's hard to find people who give a damn and actually listens to people, but they do exist. And I want to let you guys know that there is hope. And, you know, it's worth finding someone that can help you, because it really can help, even though if it takes many tries. I think there's always someone for everybody. And yeah, just keep trying. And moving forward, I believe we do need, like, autistic people need specific resources made for them for how to deal with trauma and suicidality, because I believe that autistic people deal with trauma and suicidality differently than neurotypical people. And so we need resources made for us, created by us, help us deal with those, you know, with trauma and suicidality. Because I know I'm still not over my trauma from being sexually assaulted almost 10 years ago. And I would love a resource on how to deal with that. So hopefully in the future, we would get to that. And actually, I feel I'm actually a part of a research project by Aspire, hosted by Ann Kirby. We're trying to make suicide resources for autistic people, you know? So that's also helped me, because I'm also being a part of something that affects me, and I'm working towards helping autistic people who have been suicidal or will be suicidal in the future to deal with that. So, yeah, please check it out. It's on the Aspire website. And yeah, I do believe there is hope. It's just, if it takes a long time, I'm sorry, but I think people will get there eventually. So, and you know, it's not to say that my stuff is gone, like, I still have OCD, I still have my mental illnesses, and I get depressed sometimes, but it can get better if you find the right people. Which is hard, but you can. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kayla. I'm going to share some autism-specific resources that we do have available right now. The first one is the Autism Crisis Toolkit. This was made in collaboration with the Autism and Suicide Committee at the American Association of Suicidology. The purpose of the toolkit is to identify autistic callers and texters. So it was originally written for crisis center workers, for autistic people who called or texted in. So first, to identify autistic callers or texters if they did not disclose their diagnosis, or maybe didn't even know they had one yet, if they're diagnosed later in life. to promote effective communication and to support autistic people in crisis. So the structure was that it first explained unique characteristics of autism, then it suggested practical ways to support an autistic person in crisis, and there was a one-page bulleted summary to use. And some of the things that were talked about in the resource was that an autistic person can be very literal in how they think and perceive the world. A phone call or text makes it difficult to ascertain whether to trust the person on the other end, and you have to do it at such a fast pace that being literal can help build that trust. So for example, if somebody says, if a crisis center worker were asking an autistic person who called or texted, do you want to kill yourself? They might get an answer, which is no, but literally they are going to, but what was asked of them was whether they wanted to or not. They may not want to, but they're going to, they're planning to. So being literal in what you ask is going to be very supportive for autistic people. Also knowing that their processing speed can be slow, and it's negatively correlated to anxiety. So the higher the anxiety, the slower the processing speed. It's unrelated to intelligence. Always presume competence. Autistic people may take longer to respond, and so knowing that that processing speed issue, just having a crisis center worker investigate if an autistic person's ready to end the call or not is supportive, even if they haven't talked for a while. And then when communicating, the resource shows not to use social nuances, be very purposeful in what you're talking about, very concise, very honest, even to the point where neurotypical people kind of feel like they're being rude or blunt, but an autistic person in crisis would need that honesty and that clearness, and again, to speak literally. Another thing to know when you're supporting an autistic person is that they can have a very different inner experience than they present on the outside due to masking and camouflaging, and just losing the ability to verbally communicate because of the high anxiety and the being in a crisis and regression of skills. So not assessing an autistic person based on their presentation or their behavior, instead assessing them by the way they communicate or can in the moment. So it could still be verbal. It could be written. Maybe they need to write something down or draw something. Maybe they have a card they can give. Maybe they have an assistive device they can use. And it's really, really important to listen to what they're telling you. So if they're saying they're going to kill themselves, but they're completely calm, their words have to have more weight than their presentation, even if it goes against what you're seeing. It also has some support, and I really like to, put in strengths of autistic people. So being creative and honest, fair, and problem solvers can help when assessing autistic people for suicide, can help to build safety plans that are, best and really developed for the one person who you're doing it with. Adhering to routine, detail-oriented, and rule-based, that can help use the safety plans. So keeping in mind a strength-based approach, using strengths of autism, can really help anyone, crisis center workers, first responders, anyone, professionals, clinicians, even researchers who are working with autistic people, to communicate with and support autistic people. The resource also talks about interventions, and in asking direct questions, allowing that extra time to help shift the thoughts out of perseverative loops that autistic people can get in, rumination, language to avoid, which would be anything figurative, speak using logical words, explaining what positive coping skills are and why they're used can help autistic people. And then facilitating a safety plan. This next resource, Considerations of Warning Signs. This was developed because of the warning signs of the general public. Some of them are actually aspects of autism. And so knowing considerations to take when assessing autistic people using the warning signs for the general public is supportive to know those considerations. So first is to understand the need for considerations, then recognizing the differences, and then supporting autistic people as autistic people. So first it states the warning signs of the general public, then it shows the need for considerations and supports autistic people in crisis. It actually, gives some support, supportive ideas. We always say for all the resources to not make any important life-altering decisions based on the information in the resources, because the warning signs of the general public do pertain to all autistic people too, just with considerations for autism. The information in the resources is really here to broaden existing knowledge about autistic people, but to also recognize autistic people know the most about themselves. And the job of professionals helping them is to make space for them to communicate what they need. So an example from this resource of considerations is withdrawal. Withdrawal is a warning sign of suicide for the general public, but it's a coping mechanism for autistic people. It's self-care. It can also be a warning sign of suicide. So determining any changes in withdrawal is what would help here. Even if you don't know the person at all, having that conversation using, the communication of literal, few words as possible, getting straight to the point, being bluntly honest, especially if the person's already in a crisis, can help determine if there's been any changes in withdrawal. Another one is giving away prized possessions, seeking long-term care for pets, because autistic people can also have strong emotional connections to objects, and many are connected to pets, such as therapy pets and support animals. This behavior would warrant further investigation. And then to remember that there could be other reasons why, autistic people are giving away prized possession of pets. So investigating, again, is very important, and finding out exactly what's going on for the autistic person that you're supporting. This third resource that I'm going to talk about is actual proposed set of warning signs of suicide for autistic people. There was a team that developed the resource. These people were researchers and clinicians and autistic people. Here's a proposed set of warning signs. They're very different in a lot of ways from the warning signs of suicide for the general public. The resource comes with scenarios. Each warning sign has a scenario that goes along with it to explain the behavior that a professional or family or friend might see when supporting an autistic person. Also has the latest research. This resource is from Autistica. It supports autistic children and young people. And then this resource was from the united effort of international leaders, researchers, and autistic people with lived experience who attended the Health, Wellbeing, and Suicide Prevention conference in Australia in 2021. And it raises awareness of the increased risk of suicide in the autism community. It identifies gaps in research and in practice. It also identifies solutions. And I'm going to stop sharing because those are the resources that I had to share. And Carla, I'm not sure who comes next after me.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And I just saw someone asking about resources in the chat. I don't know if you want to respond to that, but I will just want to say quickly, I can put all of the resource links as well as in an email that will go out to all attendees after this. And then also we will put the video on our website, and I'll let everyone know as soon as that's uploaded. Those are some questions in the chat. Now we were going to shift to finding a community and advocacy, first with Camille Proctor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Camille Proctor, and I'm the Executive Director of the Color of Autism Foundation. I am a light-skinned Black woman that identifies as she and her. The Color of Autism Foundation, we effectively serve as the connecting thread to people of color to, and this is going to sound strange, to other people of color, because autism has been categorized as a white disorder. And so every time a family finds us, they go, I didn't know there were other people that looked like me that had autistic children. What we do is we strive to get parents to embrace their children's identity so that their children aren't suicidal. We found that the biggest issue with parents is they project their hopes and dreams on their children, which causes a great deal of anxiety, which can lead to suicide. Our philosophy is to let the autistic lead. And what that means is having conversations with them about what they want, because at the end of the day, they are people. And treating them as such is the only way you can combat suicide within a population. Well, that's not the only thing that you can do, but it's helpful when it comes, when you have a circle of love within your own family, it's helpful. When you have high self-esteem because your family has instilled it upon you, you're hopeful. So these are the things that we stress at the Color of Autism Foundation. We want to make sure that every autistic person is living their true self and that they have a voice and choice. And we encourage parents not to silence their voices, whether they're LGBTQ, whether they live their life as a trans woman or a trans man, whether they live their life fluidly. We want to make sure that parents are as supportive as they possibly can be to prevent suicide. That is all I have. And am I sending it over to David or Olivia?
I think Morénike is going to say a few things about advocacy.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Camille. Up, you're muted.
Yeah, maybe unmuting would be nice. Hi, everyone. I had to relocate as my battery was dying. Thank you so much. There's so much that we would love to share, and we're probably going to have a continuation of this discussion at a later date. I did want to share with you all that much of what Camille mentioned, for communities of color and for people in general, we want to have practical tools to help. And so sometimes people will say, well, I'm an ally, you know, I'm not a person of color, or I'm not autistic, but I care. How can I help? Or people are saying, hey, this is something that we're dealing with in my community, with my family. What can I do? Well, there's a number of things that you can do. We're going to share some of them with you, but I just want to tell you one quick thing that you can do right now, because some people are thinking, well, I'm not an advocate. I'm not on a national or global, stage. I'm just me. That's fine. Being just you is exactly what we need you to be. I'm going to just share my screen quickly. I'm going to show you one important way that you can help. So this is a website. This is the IACC, which is the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee, and it is the federal committee that is responsible for autism-related, advising the Secretary of Health about autism-related things with research, so that they have representatives from the housing and education and criminal justice and so many different departments, the NIH and so forth. And so their website, you can Google IACC Autism, but their website is iacc.hhs.gov. If you go to their meetings page, sorry, come on, thing work for me. On their meetings page on the side, there is an option for public comments. You can also type in meeting/public comments. And so you can provide a public comment. So we give your first and last name, your email address, these are required, and some type of comment. There is a link on the website where it gives you some information about kind of the guidelines, but basically you can just say, you know what, I am an autistic person and I've struggled with suicidal ideation numerous times. And I think this is something that needs to be addressed. That, when I tried to call the text lines, contact the text line or the hotlines, the information was not relevant for me, or I haven't found therapy that seems to be viable or effective for me, and so on. So if we kind of support some of these resources, we need to hear from you all. The voices of the community matter. And so if you are a parent and you're saying, I don't have enough information, I would like to educate my child about suicidality, but I can't find enough information out there that's relevant for this population. Everything I can find isn't, really neurodiversity affirming, or, it doesn't take into account, the, cultural diversity or what have you. We need to be able to have people understand that this is an issue that needs attention, that needs funding, and needs support. So I just want to encourage you, in addition to the IACC, and you don't have to live in the United States to make a comment, but there's also your school districts and a number of other places where you can provide public comment. These things are read and they are viewed, and they matter, and they impact legislation and policy. So we strongly encourage you to use that, to use your voice in whatever way that you can to make change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and I'm so sorry. I was supposed to hand off to David. Forgive me. For
Yeah, we were just going to shift now into thinking about research as one more way to build a more positive future. So first with David Brent.
Hi, I'm David Brent. I'm a child psychiatrist at University of Pittsburgh. I also happen to have one grandson who's on the spectrum. And that's been really eye-opening for me, even though, I've had supposedly all this training. I prepared some slides about the research that we're doing, and it just doesn't seem to fit with this conversation. So I'm not going to do that. And I just feel that this is a whole world that I don't understand very well. I mean, as a clinician, I've engaged with suicidal kids who are autistic and really struggled, not really sure what to do to help, to be honest, which is why I think what Carla is doing, what all you are doing, is so important. And, I really feel at this point in the conversation, I'm more of a learner than a teacher. And I really appreciate the opportunity to have heard people's stories, and it's given me a lot of food for thought about what we can do to make things better. I think that's all I have to say.
Okay. All right. Thank you, David. Well, I feel a little weird about what I have planned to present as well, but I do want to share a little bit about our ACE Center, and it is something I am hopeful about. I am hoping that this will continue to draw attention to suicide in autistic adults, as our mission is to advance research on adult mental health and suicide. And because we're at such early stages of really highlighting this issue, we're really hoping to produce measures and a better understanding of what are those contributors to suicide in autistic people. So I also want to echo one thing that Shanter said is, I'm not autistic, but we are very, very dedicated to working closely with autistic people. And that is one of the reasons I'm really hopeful for what our ACE Center can produce. We have autistic members who are investigators on our team, as well as full-time staff and tons of consultants and collaborators. And I'm also excited that this center brings together early career investigators to the most senior researchers, as well as those new to autism who bring expertise from other fields, and those who've been in autism a long time. So I'm hoping we can start to really tackle suicide together in autism. I'm going to skip over this and come back to it. I just want to emphasize a few things about what we're doing that I hope will move things along to a deeper understanding of suicide and autism. We're really inspired by something called the Research Domain Criteria Initiative, which is developed by the NIH. And it's really this idea that we aren't going to get too far, like just focusing on like specific categories. And we need to really consider the whole lifespan and processes that cut across disorders. And of course, suicide is not a disorder, and it does cut across many things. So in our ACE Center, we're hoping to get a deep understanding by focusing on all domains. So emotional, negative, positive emotions, sensory, cognitive, social processes. And we're not just sticking with the RDoC designed domains. We're also thinking about things that are more unique, like you've heard a lot about today, like social processes like masking. And then most research in autism to date has really just been based on questionnaires or qualitative research. So we're hoping to move the needle by really considering all levels: self-report, physiology, daily behavior, neuroimaging, and then what those life experiences are that contribute to autism. As we've heard a lot today, is clearly a big part of the puzzle. So the way our center is designed, we're going to be recruiting 300 people who go through 3 interrelated projects. And one thing that's important to point out about it is we're including 200 autistic adults, 100 non-autistic adults. But in both groups, we are going to be recruiting people who are actively dealing with suicidal ideation or have had a recent attempt or behavior. And what this is going to allow us to do is to identify those things that are maybe shared across non-autistic and autistic people as risk factors, like trauma, but maybe autistic people are more likely to experience trauma. So that's why it's more salient, as well as identify things that are unique to autism. And then this is just to give a sense of the many different things that we're going to be covering in our center. I think a lot of these things we've heard about today, in discrimination, masking, various aspects of mental health. And then we're also hoping to understand what contributes to resilience and positive outcomes, such as flourishing. So we have 3 interrelated projects. Our first project is focused on developing a self-report. And our goal is to have something that's captures a continuous range of suicidality, from someone who might never really think about it, even in the worst of circumstances, to someone who's really struggles and highly suicidal. I think this is important, like going beyond just identifying as someone that is at imminent risk for an attempt, so that we can develop better preventative programs, monitor change and treatment. And then we're going to do a lot of fancy stats that I'm not going to bore you with, and that'll help us identify from all of these things what are the most symptoms or situations, items that are the most tightly linked to suicide and autism. So for this, we're also going to recruit 700 additional participants just online. Then we're also going to be doing a deep dive into understanding emotions in daily life. So we'll be having participants wear sensors on their chest and ankle as they go about their daily activities and answer 8 brief surveys. And sometimes they'll be random, and sometimes they'll be triggered by changes in that physiology. And then those questions will help us understand what is it in the daily stressors, context of life that contribute to increased thoughts of suicide or other emotional reactions in the moment. And then finally, we're also looking at the neuroscience of suicide. And I think we heard a few things about this today. Some of what Morénike said resonated with this. And then Lisa alluded to the inner experience might not match the outer experience. And that's what this project is really getting at, how you might be screaming inside, but unable to really express that or recruit the neural networks that you need to effectively get help or cope. And we're going to be doing a lot of different tasks to understand neural reactivity to both social, emotional, and sensory stimuli. So what I'm hoping from what we can gain from this is that we'll for the first time be able to connect some biological causal mechanisms to lived experiences and long-term outcomes related to suicide and positive adult mental health. We can ask questions such as, does our neural model fit with physiology and behavior in daily life and suicidal ideation 1 year later? We'll be able to validate a brief questionnaire against more in-depth physio and self-report in daily life. And then I think one thing we haven't been able to do that's really important and very unique to a center like this, so we're gonna have so much information and we will be able to see what contributes the most risk. We'll be able to compare different factors. And I think we're likely to uncover things that we haven't thought of before. So I'm hoping that moving forward, we'll have good measures, we'll have new targets to develop better interventions, and then we'll identify some factors that confer the most risk and protective benefit for personalized care. So, and then finally, I'm very excited about our dissemination partnership core, which is really the glue that holds our center together. We have a partners group full with autistic community members, and this is really our commitment to sharing science along the way. It's the impetus for panels like today, that we don't want to wait until we're done 5 years later to start talking about this and how to disseminate what we know and raise attention to suicide and autism in the community. Okay. I just want to end briefly with this. I can't thank the panel enough for their incredible sharing of information. It was really moving. And I know some of you are wanting to receive continuing education credits. So there's information here. Don't worry too much about it because I will also be sharing this by email. We'll share the video, how to access the video. We have a brief survey and would very much appreciate if you could fill it out. There's a QR code here. And also we'll include that in the email. And then I would just like to turn it back to the panel for any last closing words. I don't know. Don't know if I want to stop share. I'll send that all by email so people aren't worried about it. Anyone want to close this out? Morénike.
So I don't necessarily need to close us out. I did want to address the questions. There was one in the chat about the, are we seeking to have a variety of geographic levels and people with all levels of support needs? And I just wanted to give an enthusiastic yes. That's a huge priority of the team. But I also wanted to answer a question that came from a parent, and that question was, what are, what are some practical things that a family can do, that a parent can do to support their non-autistic child? And I just, there's a number of things you can do, but one thing that I want to say is that to be a safe haven, because there can be a lot of stress outside of outside the doors of your home. If home is a safe haven, it really helps a lot. It can help mitigate a lot of challenges. I think understand how the different aspects of our lives impact potential suicidality. I think about myself. I'm West African. I was, assigned female at birth. I'm, a non-binary woman, autistic, I'm a parent. All of those things impact my life. And so it's not just one thing. Please use neutral terminology. Everything about us and our lives is not horrible. Negative terminology, negative phrases that we hear everywhere and read everywhere can really hurt. And then just amplifying our voices. Camille, Carla, a lot of people spoke about the importance of, partnering, professionals, allies, parents, self-advocates. We need to have voices. We need to hear and see ourselves. This is a book that just came out, that's out, written by a mother, a Black autistic mother with a non-speaking autistic child and a speaking autistic child. It's called A Day with No Words. There's tons of other books. This is one, Sincerely Autistic Child. There's some open access books. Our voices, our perspectives are important and need to be amplified. Thank you.
I recognize that there may be some attendees who might be triggered by everything you've heard today. And so if you do feel triggered, if you do feel overwhelmed, please call the suicide network, call your local crisis hotline, and just know that you are not alone today. You are not alone.
And I would just like to stress to parents who are on this webinar that you embrace who your children are and always let them know how much they are loved and cherished and respected, because respect is a big deal. And if you respect your child, that's the biggest self-esteem boost there is, because they know that they're heard.
I'd like to encourage you all to recognize that autistic people of color also have multiple intersecting marginalizing identities. So to support the rights of autistic people of color, to prevent us from being in situations in which we are suicidal, I encourage you to stand up for the rights of women, especially in situations of domestic abuse. I encourage you to stand up for trans youth and adults of all genders, of all backgrounds. I encourage you to support people who are trying to fight poverty, who are trying to fight hunger, who are trying to fight homelessness, because all these issues have a relationship with race and autism. You can't talk about equity without considering class, without considering gender, without considering immigrant status. I'm a descendant of immigrants. My mother's family came here from Trinidad in the 1960s. And a lot of times, a lot of these families, a lot of immigrant families of color may not have the information that people who have been here forever, who are often white, may have. And then again, though, I'm complicated because I'm also African American as well. So, but anyway, to get back to my main point, to stop suicide among autistic people of color, you have to strike it at the roots, and you have to see the intersections between these experiences.
Yeah, that might be a perfect ending to this webinar, but does anyone else I know we're over time. Any other last words?
Oh, I just want to say thank you all for attending this panel, and for the panelists, it's been an honor talking alongside you all. Happy, I know it's about to end, April's about to end, but happy Autism Acceptance Month still. And if you take away if one thing I want you guys to take away with is, please listen to autistic people and please take us seriously. And because, we could be suicidal, and we deserve to be taken seriously when we are suicidal. And even when we're not suicidal, we deserve to be taken seriously. So yeah, please listen to us and take us seriously.
Thank you. All right. A big round of applause for our fantastic panel. Thank you, and hopefully giving everyone a lot to think about.